Yes, very interesting indeed. Some possibly 200 nuclear weapons there. And the recent expansion of that facility, we don't really know why they're expanding it so much, but indeed they are. And so I think that that's very interesting. I didn't get to touch on this. We're at the top of the hour. We're going to be passing it over to Breaking Spectre. Just before I do that, though, I wanted to show y'all that the FBI has labeled the guy who attacked Steve Scalise and GOP assassination attempt as suicide by cop, not domestic terrorism or political violence. Remember all the Democrat demands for the FBI to enhance their statistics and record keeping to quantify threats? Remember Christopher Wray using those FBI compiled statistics to say white nationalists are the greatest threat? Put these two issues together and consider what value are statistical records when those who compile the records are politically motivated to mislabel the true origin of any attack. So there's that. Well, I don't know why they would do that. That's pretty insane.
And he was just asked that in that hearing about a week ago.
Really?
Yeah, there were a bunch of people that were mad. They're like, we were there. No one ever talked to us.
Wow.
Yeah. No one from the FBI ever even contacted them or talked to them.
What?
Sitting members of Congress. That's what they were saying. And they're like, what do you
insane.
They're like, we've been here. And then because this topic was coming up that they were going to label it this, and they were outraged.
Yeah, it is pretty outrageous. The guy was clear about what he was motivated by. Good Lord. And darn well, if it was some conservative who went and tried to assassinate Democrats, they would be calling it domestic terror. So that's the double standard. Everybody sees it. Anyways, we're now passing it over to Breaking Spectre.
Hey, how we doing tonight?
How are you?
Oh, not too bad. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. It's probably about time to disband the old FBI and most of these alphabet agencies. They are absolutely inept and worthless. Get them gone.
Yeah, the FBI is the Stasi for the Democrat Party. They don't really serve any real law enforcement purpose other than that. They create terror plots that they then foil. Some of them, they don't even foil. They create them and they just let them happen.
Yeah.
The Whitmer kidnapping plot, that was FBI driven. There were 3 FBI informants and 1 undercover agent that was involved in that. But we still hear that as when the left talks about the dangerous conservatives, they're kidnappers and militias and No, and they cite the Whitmer kidnapping plot. Yeah, that was all done by the FBI. Good Lord.
Crazy.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, as you well know, I'm a little bit of a researcher here, and my research usually takes me all over the webosphere, and I came across this little ditty here today. I thought a little and I thought, you know what? This would be a good book. I found over on Amazon today, and it's impeccable timing. I can't believe that they published this thing so fast. Have you seen this? This thing's like $4.99
My goodness,
over on
look
Amazon.
at that. My first knife fight, because, this is normal. This is just what kids do.
Yeah, a little Wokester book by your friends on the left.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, yeah. I thought it was incredible timing. And, of course, because we're dealing with the left here, and the proper response, I suppose, for the cop and said taking care of business probably should have been more along these lines.
Yeah, right? Just, tell her to run, let her get stabbed. Why not? Unfortunately, though, that is my advice to police officers, because look how you're going to be treated if you try to do something.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's really sad.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. No guns, just yell like old Dave Chappelle and the old Wayne Brady skit there from back in the day of the Chappelle Show.
Yeah, there you go. That's what we're going to have to do from now on. And,
That's
the
right.
left wants, what do they want? Social workers to be handling this stuff now. They want to defund the police, except when they want to send police after their political enemies, and then they love the police. So it's just, all around insane.
Yep, pretty much. And yet we deal. So,
Yeah.
and I suppose we'll probably see a lot more of it. So get used to it, folks. This is going to be the
Yep.
agenda. This is going to be the push. This is going to be the hill that they'll try to die on to try and come after guns, all that stuff. It's the old playbook.
Yeah, and as Pinata said, they're getting the gang back together from the original Patriot conspiracy, FBI false flags of Oklahoma City bombing and Waco. All those guys that were part of that stuff, they're all being brought back together. So that shows you they're planning something.
Yeah.
And it's going to make January 6th look a lot, small time, we'll say.
Yeah.
Whatever they're planning, it's going to be bad, I think, because I think they need something like that for their push. People are just, I think they want to exhaust folks so that they just like let it go. People are tired of fighting. People haven't been able to work. Everybody is worn down and doesn't have the funds to continue to do this stuff. And that's the goal, to just starve you out, wear you down, get you exhausted, and then make the push. And they're not going to let up. They never do. They know exactly what they're trying to do. And unlike the Republicans, they don't take breaks.
No, they keep it up all the time and keep it in the news cycle 24/7, stoke the fear as always, because that's what they thrive on. And, I talked about this the other night on, the significance of 419 and even 420 for that matter, but 419 to 5/1, obviously these are some days and that they like to do their occult ritual tactics and things of that nature. So we're head on a swivel here, at least for probably about the next week yet even.
Yep, exactly. All right. You have a good night, everybody.
Alrighty.
Have
Appreciate
a good
it.
one. I'll see y'all tomorrow.
Catch you later.
See you. All right, chat. How are we doing this evening? You guys doing all right out there? I think tonight, what I'll probably do is kind of carry on a theme that old Pamphlet was talking about here prior to Radix's show. But before I do, let me go ahead and get things rolling here, and I'll see you back here on the other side. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Like I said, tonight on the broadcast, I am going to continue on a little bit of a theme here. But before I do, I want to address you guys out in chat. Thank you for joining here tonight. See quite a few regulars out there. MQG, Half Right, Anthel Chris, Camouflage Peacock, Lady D626. Quite a few of you guys out there. Thank you for joining. If you're on D Live, good to see you. We are over on Tiger Network. For those that are joining over there, good to see you. We are over on Vaughn. We are over on Trovo. Also, to the folks over on the Foxhole app, good to see you guys here tonight, even on Roku, for those that still have it. Good to have you aboard on this evening. That being said, let me bring up a couple things here, do a little housekeeping. I guess before I get into too much here, I want to show you exactly where you can find some of past shows. And here today, based on the topic and that I'm covering here, I've had quite a bit of coverage of the old COVID stuff here. So I took the time to actually go back through some old shows and whatnot, put that all in one spot. And Turnipopia out there is dropping the link to the old link tree. You can find that over on YouTube, all the various shows. And so that being said, tonight's theme is going to carry on the COVID-19 related stuff. And what I've been doing here as of late is kind of breaking it down into its various segments, because there's just so much to this thing. It's got so many different ways it can be looked at, and how many different agendas and that are unfolding as part of this. Here a few weeks back, I started off with talking about the vaccines, obviously, the various manufacturers, what has been going on with the Johnson & Johnson, the Modernas, the BioNTechs, the AstraZenecas, etc. From there, I went over to talking about the masks and all of that stuff. Tonight on the broadcast, we're going to talk about lockdowns. And this may be a couple-part series. I ended up finding one single article that had about 7 studies in it that's going to disprove the theory of lockdowns and their effectiveness. And so this will be kind of a catalyst on that I'll use. I've certainly got a lot more in the old archives net that I can bring forward. And probably as I get to the end of the show here tonight, I'll talk a little bit about where I think the next segment's going to go. SoCo, that I co-host with over on the 5x5 channel on Wednesdays during our lineup. We collectively have been pulling a lot of material here talking about the reproductive side of things, what is going on in that regard as people have or have not taken the jab, as it were. So that may be where I go next. All right, that being said, let me get into the actual article here tonight. It comes out of lockdownskeptics.org, dates back here a couple days, says 7 peer-reviewed studies that agree lockdowns do not suppress the coronavirus. And I think it's pretty well understood that we knew from the early days that this garbage was not going to work, and we know that there was another agenda behind this at the end of the day. So as many people still struggle to accept the idea that lockdowns don't have any appreciable impact on COVID cases and deaths. After all, it's obvious, isn't it, that keeping people apart will stop the virus spreading? Tom Harwood, formerly of Guido Fawkes, now of GB News, tweeted a typically incredulous response to the idea. Cannot understand how some can claim lockdowns don't work with a straight face. As if stopping people from mixing wouldn't hit transmission? Sure, argue the cost is too high, imposition on liberty too extreme. Just don't invent a fairy tale denying the basics of germ theory. And there you see the tweet in question dating back to April 14th there. Says even some diehard lockdown skeptics will say that lockdowns work in the sense of suppressing transmission for a time, but they just delay the inevitable, so are pointlessly costly. The models churned out by university academics and relied on by the government to set policy all assume lockdown restrictions work, and even claim to quantify how much impact each intervention makes. But what does the data say? What do the studies show that actually look at the evidence rather than just making a priori assumptions about how things must surely be? There have been at least 7 peer-reviewed studies which look at the questions of lockdowns from a data point of view, and all of them come to the same basic conclusion. Lockdowns do not have a statistically significant relationship with COVID cases or deaths. Here's a list of them with a key quote for ease of reference. And again, these 7 bullet items I'm going to touch upon here. Each of the various studies we'll walk through. The first of which, comparing weekly mortality in 24 European countries. The findings in this paper suggest that more severe lockdown policies have not been associated with lower mortality. In other words, the lockdowns have not worked as intended. The next one, stringency of the measures settled to fight pandemia, including lockdown, did not appear to be linked with death rate. Shocker. Lockdowns do not reduce COVID-19 deaths. Well, from the school of no, you know what? While small benefits cannot be excluded, we do not find significant benefits on case growth or of most restrictive NPIs. Also, previous studies have claimed that shelter-in-place orders saved thousands of lives, but we reassess these analyses and show that they are not reliable. We find that shelter-in-place orders had no detectable health benefits, only modest effects on behavior, and small but adverse effect on the economy. Also, we find we were not able to explain the variation of deaths per million in different regions in the world. By social isolation, herein analyzed as differences in staying at home compared to baseline. In the restrictive and global comparisons, only 3% and 1.6% of the comparisons were significantly different, respectively. And last but not least, full lockdowns and widespread COVID-19 testing were not associated with reductions in the number of critical cases or overall mortality. So it continues, says many of these studies attribute a large part of the drop in infections and deaths to the voluntary measures introduced prior to the legally enforced restrictions. However, this is typically introduced as an assumption, with no robust evidence provided in support of it, and with no consideration of the other possible reasons that infections might have fallen, such as seasonality or growing population immunity. On the rare occasion that rigorous analysis is applied to this question as well, as with Severus et al. In their article in Nature, looking at whether people staying at home, measured using mobility data, is associated with COVID deaths. The finding is similarly negative. Voluntary measures make little difference either. This may seem to defy the basics of germ theory, as Mr. Harwood put it, but it doesn't. It just means we need to understand better how the virus is getting around. First of all, much of the spread, particularly that which leads to serious disease and death, occurs in hospitals and care homes. 40% of COVID deaths in England and Wales in the spring were care home residents, while Public Health Scotland found that between half and two-thirds of serious infections were picked up in hospital. Between these and transmission in private homes, this accounts for much of it. Now, mind you, I'll break from that here real quick and say that this article is largely centric to the UK. However, I think we could likely use the same data sets and that to pretty well come up with similar conclusions here based on what we have seen here in these United States. All we have to do is look no further than the policies set forth by the Cuomos and various other governors around the country. It says in terms of community transmission, even during a stringent lockdown, such as in the UK this winter, around half the workforce are traveling to work, while only around a third work exclusively from home. Add to that many people still use supermarkets and other shops, and many children still attend school, even where the schools are only open for key workers' children, and that's a lot of social interaction. We also know from a major UK survey that less than half of people with COVID symptoms fully self-isolate, giving reason such as going to work, going to the shops, or regarding the symptoms as mild. This means we don't need to resort to unsubstantiated ideas of asymptomatic infection being a major driver of transmission, which is unsupported by evidence, since, as with similar viruses, asymptomatic infection is barely infectious and contributes very little to spread. To explain ongoing community transmission, the idea that locking down and keeping people apart will stop a virus spreading may be seductively intuitive, but intuitive ideas can be wrong. The job of science is to examine ideas and test them with evidence to see if they are more than just speculation. And the science here is clear. Lockdowns do not control the coronavirus. And this was penned by Will Jones back on the 15th. But again, as we well know, the science flip-floppers, the Faucis, the Birxes, and the like will probably try and spin studies like these on their face. So let's walk through these a little bit here. The first of which, out of Oxford Academic, SESinfo Economic Studies says, did lockdown work? An economist cross-country comparison. And I'm not going to read through all of this stuff here, the whole complete study, but I will try and highlight the abstract and maybe even a little bit of the conclusions here. It says, I explore the association between the severity of lockdown policies in the first half of 2020 and mortality rates using two indices from the Blavatnik Center's COVID-19 policy measures and comparing weekly mortality rates from 24 European countries in the first halves of 2017 to 2020, addressing policy endogeneity in two different ways. And taking timing into account, I find no clear association between lockdown policies and mortality development. And so this one is a little bit lengthy. I'll go ahead and let me drop the link out there so you guys can follow along from the article if you wish. You can just follow along via the bullet items there. There you go. You guys can have that. All right. That being said, let me jump back across here, scroll down to the conclusions that they found as part of this. Bear with the scroll here. Jump down. Age differences, conclusions. There we go. Says the lockdowns in most Western countries have thrown the world into the most severe recession since World War II, and the most rapidly developing recession ever seen in mature market economies. They have also caused an erosion of fundamental rights and the separation of powers in large parts of the world, as both democratic and autocratic regimes have misused their emergency powers and ignored constitutional limits to policymaking. And that was according to Bjornskov and Voigt 2020. It is therefore important to evaluate whether and to which extent the lockdowns have worked as officially intended to suppress the spread of the SARS-CoV-2 virus and prevent deaths associated with it. Comparing weekly mortality in 24 European countries, the findings in this paper suggest that more severe lockdown policies have not been associated with lower mortality. In other words, the lockdowns have not worked as intended. Further tests also show that early interventions offered no additional benefits or effectiveness, and even indicate that the lockdowns of the spring of 2020 were associated with significantly more deaths in the particular age group between 60 and 79 years. These general findings are consistent with the results of previous papers using a variety of simpler methods to test the effects of lockdowns. Contrary to persistent political claims, as indicated by recent research in Ben David et al. In 2021, the traditional approach of carefully disseminating public information about the epidemic and relying on voluntary measures may have represented the only policy significantly associated with fewer cases than no reaction at all. Although almost all other countries went substantially further. Likewise, much has been made of the timing of lockdowns, but the present analysis does not indicate that early lockdowns were more effective. Examples also suggest that lockdown timing may not have been a significant determinant of mortality development. While Belgium and Portugal were among the countries that locked down soon after seeing the first COVID-related death, the former saw an 11% increase in mortality compared with the preceding 3 years, while the latter only saw a 2% increase. Among countries that locked down later, the UK experienced an 18% higher mortality than the preceding years, while German mortality in the first half of 2020 was almost exactly average for the time of the year, and as such, the data illustrates that strategic examples, as are often used in popular media, can be highly misleading, which necessitates a more comprehensive evaluation of lockdown efficacy. So no real shocker there, right? All right, over to the next study, the COVID-19 mortality, a matter of vulnerability among nations facing limited margins of adaptation. This comes from Frontiers in Public Health and was performed, looks like this wrapped up in November of 2020. The context and methods here says the human development territories have been severely constrained under the COVID-19 pandemic. A common dynamics has been observed, but its propagation has not been homogeneous over every continent. We aimed at characterizing the non-viral parameters that were most associated with death rate. So the method says we tested major indices from 5 domains: demography, public health, economy, politics, and environment, and their potential associations with COVID-19 mortality during the first 8 months of 2020 through a principal component analysis and a correlation matrix with a Pearson correlation test. Data of all countries or states and federal countries showing at least 10 fatality cases were retrieved from official public sites. For countries that have not yet finished the first epidemic phase, a prospective model has been computed to provide options of death rates evolution. So what was the conclusion? Well, countries that already experienced a stagnation or regression of life expectancy with high income and NCD rates had the highest price to pay. This burden was not alleviated by more stringent public decisions. Inherent factors have predetermined the COVID-19 mortality. Understanding them may improve prevention strategies by increasing population resilience through better physical fitness and immunity. Better physical fitness and immunity, you say? Well, that's interesting. How often do we hear that across the airwaves from the old mockingbird media? Almost never. How to improve your immune health? What sort of things should you be getting out and doing? Walking, running, jogging, doing whatever, being physically active, getting vitamin D, things of that nature. But you'll never hear that now, will you? And off to the next study. It says government mandated lockdowns do not reduce COVID-19 deaths. Implications for evaluating the stringent New Zealand response. This one dates back to August 18th of 2020 from Taylor and Francis Online. These are New Zealand's economic papers here. And the abstract on this one says, the New Zealand policy response to coronavirus was the most stringent in the world during the level 4 lockdown. Up to $10 billion of output, roughly 3.3% of GDP, was lost in moving to level 4 rather than staying at level 2, according to Treasury calculations. For lockdown to be optimal requires large health benefits to offset this output loss. Forecast deaths from epidemiological models are not valid counterfactuals due to poor identification. Instead, I use empirical data based on variation amongst the United States counties, over 1/5 of which just had social distancing rather than lockdown. Political drivers of lockdown provide identification. Lockdowns do not reduce COVID-19 deaths. This pattern is visible on each date that key lockdown decisions were made in New Zealand. The apparent ineffectiveness of lockdown suggests that New Zealand suffered large economic costs for little benefit in terms of lives saved. So there we see the introduction there. I'm not going to read through that. I'm going to buzz through, see what we got here for conclusions net on this particular study. Again, these are fairly lengthy, so you guys can read at your leisure with the link in that was dropped there. Let's see. Did I scroll past it? Oh, summary and implications. All right, here we go. It says lockdowns are ineffective at reducing COVID-19 deaths. Variation amongst counties in the United States, where over 1/5 had no lockdown, shows no impact of lockdowns. Specifically, one cannot reject the hypothesis of zero difference in deaths between lockdowns and non-lockdown counties. And I guess I'll pause right there and say, all right, for those who are paying attention, you've probably seen the correlation or the maps in that have indicated what California has done versus, say, what DeSantis has done in Florida, right? And there's very little difference at the end of the day, whether or not you lock down or don't lock down, even with the fact that Florida probably has more of an aging populace than, say, California does. And I think that's likely what they're referring to there. It says using these results to inform a counterfactual of what would have happened if New Zealand had not gone into a level 4 lockdown faces the criticism that the setting is different. Yet it is a universal force of human nature, privately taking steps to reduce exposure to a new risk that likely makes lockdowns superfluous. Moreover, evidence from elsewhere suggests that lockdowns were either superfluous, Hamburg 2020, Stone 2020, or caused total deaths to rise because of non-COVID mortality. And here we see the folks that contributed to this study. It says a non-economist might say, what difference does it make? Or perhaps HRC, but I digress. It says if people would reduce iterations away due to perceived COVID-19 risks, having government force them to stay home would seem costless. Yet, as economists know, a government diktat approach runs into the central planning problem. No central planner has all the information collectively held by parties involved in voluntary exchange, and that from Hayek in 1945. For example, absent lockdown, if a butcher felt they could operate safely, and if customers felt they could safely shop at the butchery, voluntary and beneficial exchange could occur. Instead, under the central planning approach applied in New Zealand, butchers were shut, but supermarkets selling meat were not. Potentially, much economic surplus for both consumers and producers was lost. In terms of implications for the future, these results add to the evidence that lockdowns are ineffective. This was also the prior view in public health. For example, Inglesby et al. From 2006, page 371, where he noted, it is difficult to identify circumstances in the past half century when large-scale quarantine has been effectively used in the control of any disease. So when the next pandemic occurs, the COVID-19 lockdowns should not be considered a success that should be replicated. In terms of the recent past, the ineffectiveness of lockdowns implies that New Zealand suffered large output losses of $10 billion or more, according to Treasury figures, for no likely benefit in terms of lives saved as a result of the decision to move almost immediately from level 2 to level 4. Notably, this decision went against Ministry of Health advice to stay at level 2 for 30 days. If decision-making for March and April is reviewed, any claim that lockdown was necessary to save lives can be treated with strong skepticism. It is especially concerning that there were data available on the dates of those key decisions to show that lockdowns are ineffective at reducing COVID-19 deaths. All right, so we're 3 for 3 so far. Carry on to number 4 here. And we go over to the European Journal of Clinical Investigation, where we have assessing mandatory stay-at-home and business closure effects on the spread of COVID-19. This one looked like it's published here back on January 5th of this year. The abstract, background, and aims of this particular study said the most restrictive non-pharmaceutical interventions, NPIs, for controlling the spread of COVID-19 are mandatory stay-at-home and business closures. Given the consequences of these policies, it is important to assess their effects. We evaluate the effects on epidemic case growth of more restrictive NPIs above and beyond those of less restrictive NPIs. And of course, what were the results and conclusions? Well, implementing any NPIs was associated with significant reductions in case growth in 9 out of 10 study countries, including South Korea and Sweden, that implemented only IR NPIs. Spain and had a non-significant effect. After subtracting the epidemic and IR NPI effects, we find no clear, significant beneficial effect of MR NPIs on case growth in any country. In France, for example, the effect of MR NPIs was plus 7%, with a 95% confidence interval, when compared with Sweden, and plus 13%, when compared with South Korea. Positive means pro-contagion. The 95% confidence intervals excluded 30% declines in all 16 comparisons and 15% declines in 11 of the 16 comparisons. So bottom line, while small benefits cannot be excluded, we do not find significant benefits on case growth of more restrictive NPIs. Similar reductions in case growth may be achievable with less restrictive interventions. All right, 4 for 4, off to number 5. So now we go over to PNAS, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States, evaluating the effects of shelter-in-place policies during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this one was just wrapped up here, April 13th of this year. The abstract on this one says we estimate the effects of shelter-in-place orders during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. We do not find detectable effects of these policies on disease spread or deaths. We find small but measurable effects on mobility that dissipate over time, and we find small delayed effects on unemployment. We conduct additional analyses that separately assess the effects of expanding versus withdrawing SIP orders and test whether there are spillover effects in other states. Our results are consistent with prior studies showing that SIP orders have accounted for a relatively small share of the mobility trends and economic disruptions associated with the pandemic. We reanalyzed 2 prior studies purporting to show that SIP orders cause large reductions in disease prevalence and show that these results are not reliable. Our results do not imply that social distancing behavior by individuals, as distinct from SIP policy, is ineffective. And so I'll just jump down to the conclusions here. Let's see here. Results. And finally, concerns and limitations. All right, here's the conclusions. It says, although we estimate modest effects of SIP policies, our results should not be taken to imply that the actions of government officials had little effect on the pandemic. Oh, of course, we got to throw in a little wiggle room and say, well, perhaps they didn't know any better, right? There may have been other policies that better mitigated the spread of COVID-19, although SIP orders have been arguably the most drastic and controversial policy. Furthermore, we observe nationwide trends in all outcomes, and these trends may have been highly responsive to the public health recommendations, emergency declarations, and the behaviors of high-profile politicians. Our results also do not mean that sheltering in place per se is an ineffective way to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. If SIP policies did not meaningfully increase the extent to which people actually sheltered in place or socially distanced, our results have nothing to say about the health and societal benefits of staying at home and reducing physical contact with others. The explanation for our null findings is likely nuanced and multifaceted. One part of the explanation is that many people were already staying at home and social distancing voluntarily, even in the absence of SIP policies. Another part of the explanation is, perhaps, the few people who weren't already changing their behavior complied with the policies. After all, SIP orders appeared to cause less than a 1% decrease in mobility. There was, however, approximately a 50% decrease in mobility nationwide between February and April. The nationwide reactions to COVID-19 almost surely decreased the spread of the disease. Almost surely? Where's the science behind that? The nationwide reaction to COVID-19 almost surely decreased the spread of the disease. Let that sink in. They put that in their conclusions, but yet have nothing to back it. SIP orders likely would have been more effective in slowing the spread had more people complied with them, and future SIP orders would likely be more effective if they are coupled with greater enforcement. Oh, the beatings will continue until the compliance improves. But we find little evidence that SIP orders, as implemented, had much effect over and above all other public messaging and voluntary behavior changes occurring nationwide. Although we find no detectable health benefits of SIP orders, we also find that they accounted for a small share of economic costs associated with the pandemic, consistent with other studies. All right, that being said, let's jump over to number 6. And we find out of scientific reports. Nature.com here says, stay-at-home policy is a case of exception fallacy, an internet-based ecological study. This wrapped up here March 5th, there we go, this year. The abstract on this one, a recent mathematical model has suggested that staying at home did not play a dominant role in reducing COVID-19 transmission. The second wave of cases in Europe in regions that were considered as COVID-19 controlled may raise some concerns. Our objective was to assess the association between staying at home, a percentage, and the reduction/increase in the number of deaths due to COVID-19 in several regions in the world. And this ecological study, data from Google, COVID-19 mobility, nice source there, ourworldindata.org and covid.sa.gov.br were combined. Countries with greater than 100 deaths and with a healthcare access and quality index of greater than or equal to 67 were included. Data were pre-processed and analyzed using the difference between number of deaths to millions between two regions and the difference between the percentage of staying at home. The analysis was performed using linear regression with special attention to residual analysis. After pre-processing the data, 87 regions around the world were included, yielding 3,741 pairwise comparisons for linear regression analysis. Only 63, or about 1.6%, comparisons were significant, so basically negligible. With our results, we were not able to explain if COVID-19 mortality is reduced by staying at home in roughly 98% of the comparisons after epidemiological weeks 9 to 34. So what conclusions did they draw? Well, let's see here. Scroll. Comparisons, discussion, keep going. I'm sure this looks real nice on screen. Apologize for that, but let's see. Still going through the data. Change history. Did I scroll past it? Lots of references here. I think I might have scrolled past it. I'm not sure. Change history, comparison, time, processing, inclusion. Lots of mathematics, methods. I don't know where the conclusions went on this one. I don't think it's beyond this. Lots of dang references, that's for sure. Acknowledgements, contributions. Yeah, I guess that's all we get on that one. Anyway, like I said, you guys can read this stuff for yourself in the link provided. So off to the last one here. This one out of eClinical Medicine. This one from the Lancet. We get a country-level analysis measuring the impact of government actions, country preparedness, and socioeconomic factors on COVID-19 mortality and related health outcomes. This one conducted and wrapped up last July of last year. The abstract on this one says a country-level exploratory analysis was conducted to assess the impact of timing and type of national health policy/actions undertaken towards COVID-19 mortality and related health outcomes. And of course, what did they find on this one? Well, increasing COVID-19 caseloads were associated with countries with higher obesity. Oh, comorbidities, you say. Interesting. Adjusted rate ratio, 1.06, 95% confidence interval. Median population age was with 95% confidence interval and longer time to border closures from the first reported case. There we see that as well. Increased mortality per million was significantly associated with higher obesity prevalence and per capita gross domestic product, GDP. Reduced income dispersion, reduced mortality, and the number of critical cases. Rapid border closures, full lockdowns, and widespread testing were not associated with COVID-19 mortality per million people. However, full lockdowns, reduced country vulnerability, and biological threats on the global health security scale for risk environment were significantly associated with increased patient recovery rates. And how are we supposed to interpret that? Well, in this exploratory analysis, low levels of national preparedness, scale of testing, and population characteristics were associated with increased national caseload and overall mortality. And of course, and that's if you can believe the cases, and that with a largely fictitious and false readings, 97% ineffective PCR tests that produces false positives. So what are we really measuring here at the end of the day? Nonetheless, you guys get the idea. Let's move on to where this is all headed. And as we just got done discussing here about the old climate change and things of that nature, right? Well, it seems that the pivot has already begun. You know, we saw the Project Veritas stuff come last week where they had the CNN folks net under cover. And it said, yeah, we're going to start to pivot to climate change. Well, it's already starting to manifest. This out of Zero Hedge here today. It says IEA issues dire warning about 5% rise in CO2 emissions happening as a result of COVID reopening. Well, no shit, Sherlock. Gee, what do you think is going to happen when you got all these people that have been sitting at home? All the cars off the road and everything else, right? Especially in states, blue states that have been locked down, red states, probably no changes. But gee, do you think that you're going to probably reduce emissions if there's less people on the road? And perhaps when people actually do start to go back to work after being at home, that you're going to see a rise? But this constitutes a dire warning? Good God. The International Energy Agency, IEA, has issued what is being called a dire warning about CO2 emissions. stating that global emissions are going to rise 5% this year, likely as a result of the economic rebound attributed to COVID. The agency said the levels would be anything but sustainable for the climate, Reuters reported on Tuesday. However, estimates for emissions would come in under 2019's peak. The IEA released its Global Energy Review for 2021 and predicted CO2 levels would rise to 33 billion tons this year, up 1.5 billion tons from 2020. Gee, maybe that's a bad baseline to use, idiots. It marks the largest single increase in more than a decade. Yeah, nice comparison. The IEA Executive Director, Fatih Birol, said, "This is a dire warning that the economic recovery from the COVID crisis is currently anything but sustainable for our climate. The rise will be chalked up to a resurgence in coal power due to the economic reopening. Yet, despite the panic and the talk of a dire warning, 2021 emissions are set to come in under 2019's peak, and there's a reasonable explanation for the 5% rise that the IEA is making noise about. Meanwhile, overall global energy demand is expected to increase 4.6% in 2021, led by emerging markets and developing economies. Fossil fuel demand is also forecast to grow in 2021, as coal and gas demand is expected to rise above 2019 levels. More than 80% of the projected growth in coal demand in 2021 will come from Asia, the report noted. Greta, where art thou? The report is expected to put pressure on the Biden administration to act. Red print money we don't have and allocate it to every green boondoggle and site on climate change. Shocker, right? So, of course, how does this all fold into everything going on? Of course, we've talked about the Great Reset. We've talked about COVID, the many facets of it, where this all leads, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. Well, perhaps you might remember this little ditty taking place here about a month or so ago, back in February, actually. World Economic Forum kicking out a tweet and then rescinding it. Lockdowns are not quietly improving cities, World Economic Forum concedes, deleting its much ridiculed tweet. Do you think this is all by design, folks? Of course it is. A little projection here at its finest. The World Economic Forum has taken down his tweet that claimed lockdowns have been quietly improving cities and admitted that it is not the case. But the backdowns didn't spare the globalist titan from a new wave of mockery. The WEF's controversial message turned out to be quite short-lived, surviving less than a day on its feed under a barrage of outraged comments. The tweet was accompanied by a video showing deserted streets and silent factories that noted a record drop in carbon emissions. It also linked to an article claiming that silent cities contributed to better detection of minor earthquakes. Sure it did. On Saturday, the organization deleted the tweet accepting that coronavirus-induced lockdowns were not actually quietly improving cities. Still, it insisted that the restrictions have been an important part of the public health response to COVID-19. And of course, here is the tweet in question at the time. We're deleting this tweet. Lockdowns aren't quietly improving cities around the world, but they are an important part of the public health response to COVID-19. That kicked out on February 27th. Says a concession tweet, however, has received an equally poor reception. Too late. You already said locking us in our homes has improved the world. Not the most casual of statements, is it? Bit hard to forget you said that. And another one says, who'd have thought a tweet promoting humans not living full lives wouldn't go down too well? Shocker. You highlighted that worked for you effing idiots. How many suicides, depression, and financial hardships, to mention a few, this BS has caused around the world with zero changes? Maybe someone needs to make a video highlighting all that. Exactly. All part of the plan, folks. And so where does this all lead? Well, this little ditty came out last night. Doug Casey on the shocking 2025 Deagle forecast, war, population reduction, and the collapse of the West. Out of International Man. Says Deagle is a private online source for the military capabilities of the world's nation states. It recently released a shocking 5-year forecast. The report analyzes countries by projected population size, GDP, defense budget, and more. In it, they predict a 70% reduction in the size of the United States population. Let me read that again, folks. In it, they predict a 70% reduction in the size of the United States population. This is a bold prediction. What are your thoughts on this? Doug Casey says, I've got to say that I wasn't familiar with Deagle. It keeps a low profile. Deagle is in the same business as Jane's, which has been in the business of analyzing weapon systems for many decades. A look at the Deagle website, which is quite sophisticated, makes it clear we're not dealing with some blogger concocting outrageous clickbait. It seems to be well connected with defense contractors and government agencies like the clowns. And they've predicted that about 70% of the US population and about the same percentage in Europe is going to disappear in 2025. 4 years from now, folks. It's hard to believe that anybody in their position would make a forecast like that. There's no logical business reason for it, especially since it was done before the COVID hysteria gripped the world. It stretches a reader's credulity. Could it possibly happen? It would be the biggest thing in world history. Does it have a basis in reality, or is it just some bizarre trolling exercise? I'm not sure. It's hard to take almost anything from any source at face value these days, but for the last several years, I've been saying that World War III would basically be a biological war. Of course, it will have substantial conventional, nuclear, space-based, and AI computer elements as well. But its most serious component will be biological. Essentially, it will involve the use of bacteria and viruses to wipe out the enemy. The odds are that it will be between the US and China, but since anyone with a CRISPR in their garage can hack the genome and DNA of almost anything and anybody, there are no limits to the possibilities. Certainly, from the Chinese point of view, a biological war makes all the sense in the world. That's because the Han Chinese share a lot of genetic similarities. Presumably, a bacteria or virus can be bred to favor the Chinese and take out most everybody else. The fact is that anybody that can be done eventually will be done. It's just a law of large numbers. Somebody might respond, well, that's horribly racist. Well, of course it's racist. Notwithstanding rational and philosophical arguments against it, all ethnic groups and countries are quite naturally racist. A fear of different racial and ethnic groups has been bred into humans as a survival mechanism over the hundreds of thousands of years since we became biologically modern. All races and ethnic groups like to think that they're the best or the most worthy, and that none of the other members or are other, perhaps, are only marginally human. Biological warfare plays directly into feeling. Americans who, like everybody else, see themselves as the good guys, believe we're immune to that. However, we forget that the U.S. pioneered modern biowarfare. Fort Detrick, Maryland, has been an epicenter for it for over 70 years. And there are undoubtedly many other more clandestine sites where U.S. government agencies are working on biological warfare. No doubt, the Chinese and other major powers are working clandestinely as well. It's not something anybody wants to advertise for many reasons. What shocks me is not that a biowar is being researched or even actively wargamed, but that a connected organization like Deagle is actually saying it publicly. It's not like what goes on in the spook community is an open book. Deagle doesn't explicitly say what exactly will cause the great die-off, but there are many advantages to biological warfare over other types of warfare. So it will probably be featured. It's probably inevitable now that the technology has made it practical. What are the advantages of biowar? What might wargaming generals like about it? First, it doesn't destroy material. That's a huge plus. After all, what is the point of conquering a country if you have to show for it as a smoking radioactive ruin? That's the major advantage of the neutron bomb, of course. It kills the people, but limits damage to buildings. Bioweapons essentially make atomic weapons obsolescent. Second, bioweapons can be structured attack only certain racial groups. That's potentially either a big advantage or disadvantage to China. The diverse population of the US could also be either an advantage or a disadvantage, depending on who strikes first. But on the bright side, you can perhaps immunize your own population, or at least the military and essential workers to control the damage. And I guess I'll pause right there and think gee, what did we learn over the last several years about who is currently sitting in China at the moment that has anything to do with DNA, for example? A little company called 23andMe, sister to L0ckd0wns, tied into Google, YouTube, all those folks. You think they can't do that? Third, bioweapons are very cheap and easy to fabricate. Anyone with access to a good high school chemistry lab is in business. There's no need for expensive and tricky U-235 or, for that matter, any of the junk toys the Pentagon spends hundreds of billions on. Fourth, bioweapons don't need sophisticated delivery systems. Again, no need for B-2s, B-52s, cruise missiles, ICBMs, or any of that. A sick tourist or two, or a few packages sent in the mail, can get the job done. Fifth, bioweapons, whether they're viruses or bacteria, not only plausible deniability, but the potential to blame a third party. You can launch an attack, and nobody can really be sure who did it, or even that an attack is, in fact, being launched. And think to what we're seeing play out now, the back and forth, whether or not China, Wuhan, and the whole business of that is playing out. Nonetheless, one of the links in the article highlights this deagle.com. They've put it out on archive.is. And here, obviously, you can clearly see the United States, this is what they're projecting, down from 326 million down to under 100 million folks by the year 2025. That's just 4 years out, folks. A couple other countries that show a little bit of a degradation in population: China slightly, Russia slightly, Japan down about 23 million. A lot of the other ones picking up. We're seeing Italy a drop, France drop, Canada, South Korea, Netherlands, quite a few in here, but none quite as staggering as what is predicted for the United States. And I do recall seeing many years ago something very similar to that. Whether or not that was the same outfit making those sorts of predictions, this dating back to maybe 2015, 2016 time frame, and kind of threw that in the back of the mind and says, well, maybe that could or could not happen, but yet here we are. And so is it within the realm of possibility? Absolutely. Absolutely is. Somebody is obviously paid to make these sorts of predictions at the end of the day, so we'll have to see. That being said, that's going to do it for what I have for prepared material tonight. Like I said, I'll get the show uploaded on my archive sites here, put it in with all the cv-19 stuff that I showed at the beginning of the broadcast here. And like I said, I think between SoCo and I, we've got enough material that probably the next logical place we're going to go to after the lockdown side of things is the actual reproductivity side of things. What is going on with male and female fertility around us? Nobody really knows. Definitely got a lot of articles playing into that over the years, and other factors as well, not just the jabs. Things like glyphosate, 5G, all that is going to come to play as part of this. There's some very, very interesting phenomena going on right now that definitely is not getting a lot of attention. So stay tuned in that regard, and we'll have more for you next time around. So that being said, I see Mega Swagga in-house. How we doing tonight, sir?
How's it going, Breaking?
How goes it?
Very good.
Salty Crystal?
I'm just chilling in Cedar Rapids.
There you go. See, I needed to preempt Salty from,
There you go.
Yeah, right? Because I could have asked for it.
Iowa doing great.
Awesome. How's
All right.
chat tonight? How's chat feeling?
Yeah. Hey, guys. How's it going? Great show, Breaking. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Take care. I'll see you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, so I see everybody's ready for the MAGA Mullet Show. Business in the front, party in the back. We will get to the show opener in just one moment, right?
I think
right,
so.
Swaggles?
I think so. Okay, we're going to do this, right?
Yes.
We're going to do this? Okay, let's see if you guys were in an okay mood. Hopefully, it wasn't like, the Tuesday night mood when...
What was...
I don't know. I have no idea. Hold on. What happened Tuesday? Yeah, let's just forget about Tuesday.
What happened Tuesday?
Let's just forget Tuesday. Forget Tuesday ever happened, okay?
That's all right. It's all good. I'm like, well, Tuesday was pretty cool.
Yes,
Just saying.
I think so.
It was.
I think so. All right, here we go. Come on.
All right, guys, here we go.
Let's see. Here we go. Yes.
Oh gosh, I think the battery's running out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hold the line, Patriots. Yeah. Yes.
I love it. I'm Pepe.
It's true.
So true.
Whoa.
Oh my god.
What's going on here, folks? It's true. This is true.
It's so true.
It's true. Whoa. Oh, it's true. It's true. Whoa.
Cousin. See, you did get that.
Oh, gross. What? It's true.
That is so true.
Look at NPCs. Whoa. Whoa. What is going on here, folks? It's true. It's true. Oh, this is true too.
True.
Come on. Yes.
So true.
Whoa.
Oh my god. How dare you?
Whoa. What's that? It's true. It's true. Whoa. Gross. This is true. It's true.
I love this one so much. Come on, man.
Hey, what's in this Parmesan cheese? Okay? Inside every, oh my goodness. Inside every Parmesan. Yes. I will never look at Parmesan cheese again, folks.
Yeah.
All right? Welcome to the MAGA Mullet Show.
Kamala tripped up the podium the other day. This is true, actually. I think I saw that.
Really?
Yeah, I think I
No.
saw that, but I don't have the clip for it, though. I'm just going to say I don't have the clip for it. But if anybody does, shoot it on over. Yeah, she
Come
did.
on, man. What's
Come on,
happening
man.
here? Are they actually morphing into a single person? These
I
two?
don't know.
What's going on?
La Rona Destroyers. Somebody got it out there. All right. So you had some LeBron memes, and I wanted to start off because this was just breaking, hot off the presses.
Oh my goodness.
President Trump said LeBron James should focus on basketball rather than presiding over the destruction of the NBA, which has just recorded the lowest television ratings by far in the long and distinguished history of the league.
He is, oh my goodness, so awesome.
His racist rants are divisive, nasty, insulting, and demeaning. He may be a great basketball player, but he is doing nothing to bring our country together.
It's true.
It's true.
It's true. Look, he's speaking the truth, speaking truth to power, calling things out. Look, I think more than half the nation is absolutely on board with this guy.